Hello and welcome to Dawn Chorus Writes, a Miraculous Ladybug fanfiction and audiofiction. This is the series, The Truth Behind the Lie, written by Jheqia, narrated by Dawn, myself, hello, and this is for Jheqia's Wednesday. So this is part 2. If you haven't listened to part 1, that will be listed below. Make sure you give Jheqia loads of love by checking out her links below. Make sure you send me some love by smashing that like button. Comment down below what you think of it and what will happen next, and make sure you subscribe so you do not miss out on future treats like this, Jheqia's Wednesday and other series and one-shots, and I hope you enjoy. Part 2. Marinette placed down a plate of cookies on the table along with 2 glasses of milk. Her not dropping anything was as much surprise to her as the fact that Adrien was sitting across from her. If someone had told me yesterday that I would have hugged Adrien, told him my problems with Lila, and sat down with him over cookies and milk, then I would have assumed they were either crazy or akumatized, she thought, her mind still spinning from the afternoon events. Adrien had saved her from Lila and rubbed it in her face by pretending that Marinette had forgotten about a date. He carried her bag, held her hand, and wrapped his arm around her waist, and called her my sweet. If she wasn't so exhausted by everything, she would have danced around the room. As it was, she couldn't help nervously bounce on her toes as she moved around the kitchen. "Thanks, Marinette," he said kindly. He was so gentle and polite, being grateful for such a simple thing as cookies and milk. It was because he didn't really have these kinds of things very often, and the thought made Marinette want to thrash his father for depriving him of childhood. She blushed. "No problem. Put yourself together, Marinette. Just because the boy of your dreams looks adorable in a milk mustache does not mean you have to wander into daydreams. There is a problem, and he's going to help you solve it. Snap out of it." She sat down at the table across from him, focusing on her pencil and pad of blank paper. "So, what can we do about Lila? Even Alia doesn't believe me." He frowned. "What happened?" Her heart sank. "I don't know," she said dejectedly. "Cat Noir suggested I talk to you and Alia about all this, but you were so busy, and Alia just thinks I'm jealous of Lila. We haven't talked much about it since then. Not that they had much choice in the matter. She was still Ladybug and Alia was still Renovative. Shadowmoth was still out there, and no matter how stressed things got between them, Marinette still needed her ally in the fight, even if she couldn't bear her soul to her about everything anymore. "Sounds lonely," he said, sympathy shining in his eyes. "Yeah, it is," she sighed. "I know she would still be there if I need her for something else, but this? I know it's not her fault, but it hurts that we can't see eye to eye." He reached across the table and patted her hand gently. "I know. We'll get through this together, Marinette, and Alia will come round once we trap Lila in our own lies. I promise." She nearly melted right there, and she was pretty sure she had a goofy grin on her face, but this smile was so warm and gentle that she couldn't help it. She was blushing again before slowly pulling her hand and thoughts away from him. "Right, so how are we going to trap a liar at her lies?" she asked nervously. "I don't know, but I'm sure we'll come up with something, Marinette. You're as smart as Ladybug, and I'll do whatever I can to help." "Well, as much as I would like to just tell one of the teachers, I'm not sure that would go very far." "Yeah, even if they believed us, then Lila would just go after you, where I can't back you up like I did yesterday, and that dating thing won't hold for long," he grumbled, frustrated. "It's just an idea to stun Lila and get you out of there." "Too bad you aren't already dating someone," Marinette mused, tapping her lips with her pencil. Not that she wanted that, but it would have made it easier to refute Lila. "Then you could just say that she was lying because you already had a girlfriend? Do you think Kagami would be willing to play the part long enough for us to get Lila off our backs?" "She would probably just impale her with a saber and be done with it," he said, chuckling darkly. especially if she knew you were getting threatened. We may have mostly patched up our friendship, but she is always asking how you are and what you've been doing. I think you're her best friend, Marinette." She looked sheepishly at him. "Yeah, we just don't get to spend a lot of time together, you know? Since she doesn't go to our school and all." He nodded. "Besides, I told Lila I asked you on a date, remember? If I show up with another girl, I think it might make matters worse." "True," she sighed sadly, doodling absent-mindedly on the page before her. She wasn't really paying that much attention to the sketch. Just two little cartoon versions of themselves, holding hands, appeared under her pencil, and face down Lila, who wore little horns on her head, with a little speech bubble over cartoon Adrien that said, "Ready to go, my sweet?" Suddenly his hand tapped her page. "May I see?" "It's just a silly sketch. What happened earlier?" she murmured, embarrassed, averting her eyes as she passed him the page. He chuckled, then gasped. "Marinette, you're probably going to think I'm crazy, but..." His voice sounded strange, nearly strangled. She looked up at him. He was blushing to the roots of his hair and rubbed the back of his neck nervously. "What if you were the girlfriend I was dating?" Her eyes blew wide in shock, and her pencil fell from her limp fingers, rolled off the table. She was pretty sure her heart had stopped. "Me?" she squeaked. "Date you?" "Yeah," he said, grinning lopsidedly. "I mean, I know we both don't like lies or liars, but I already started the ball rolling, and if we told everyone I was dating someone else, then she would probably just use that against us." "True," she murmured thoughtfully, but her head was swimming at the idea. Adrien wanted to fake date her? Was that like a friend date, a platonic date? Marinette's heart soared and then plummeted when she remembered that it would only be to trap Lila. Besides, she knew Adrien loved someone else. It wouldn't be real for him. "But I wouldn't want you to do something you're not comfortable with just to help me." It would only be for a few weeks," he said quickly, sensing her hesitation. "Just until we get Lila caught up on her own lies. Besides, any guy would be lucky to have someone as amazing as you for their girlfriend, even if it's just pretend. That is, if you want it to be." "But what about the other girl?" she asked softly, trying to be gentle and hide the stab to her heart at the same time. "The one who didn't like your jokes?" He looked surprised and then swallowed audibly, his cheeks stained as pink as hers. "Oh," he said sadly. Well," he sighed. "She just keeps turning me down, so no conflict there. If that's what you're worrying you. How did you even remember that anyway?" "I remember everything about you." Her words were barely a breath, and she doubted he heard them at all. Oh, but she wanted to pull him into a hug and tell him she saw him. She knew him without the mask he wore, and loved him more than she could ever find the words to say. What about you?" he asked shyly. "Do you have someone who might object to this?" Her eyes were so anxious that she didn't know what she should say. Her rational mind, the part she channeled most when she was Ladybug, screamed that this was a bad idea, but she was drowned by the chorus of squealing lovesick Marinette, dreaming of green eyes and hamsters. She wasn't even sure she could do more than squeak, since she was pretty sure her mouth had become too dry for actual speech. She struggled to give him a pained smile and shook her head. Adrien reached across the table to cover her hands with his. "Marinette, I know you and Kagami are friends, and she probably told you about a lousy boyfriend I am, but..." "No!" she exclaimed, grasping his hand, determination blazing like a fire that burned away the conflict and nonsense whirling in her mind. "She just said that you had let her down. She never said that you were a lousy boyfriend, and I wouldn't believe her if she had. You're amazing, Adrien. I don't know how you've managed it, but you always have been there when I needed help. You care about your friends from such a big heart. After everything you've been through, you don't need special jewelry to be a hero. You already won. She knew her mouth had run away with her again, but she couldn't let him go on thinking so poorly of himself. It hurt her too much to see the self-doubt in his eyes. She gave his hand a gentle squeeze. You make the world better in so many small ways, and none of them have to be with modelling or fashion or your father. Just knowing you has made things better for me, so please, don't talk so badly about yourself. It hurts me when you do. Adrien just stared back at her, eyes wide, cheeks pink, and mouth slightly ajar, as if she was the most astonishing thing he'd ever seen. She remembered Cat Noir telling her she was Adrien's hero, his everyday ladybug, and she blushed furiously, letting go and looked down quickly. Sorry, I just... No, he whispered. He got up and came round the table to squat next to her on her seat, taking her hand once more. Never be sorry for speaking from your heart, Marinette. It will always be beautiful to me. Please, look at me. She forced herself to look at him and saw that same gentle smile on his face was shining in his eyes. Oh, her heart was squeezed tight and she was pretty sure she wasn't breathing anymore. Was that why the room was fading around her, or was that just him? Do you mean it, Marinette? She nodded, biting her lower lip. His smile widened into a droopy grin, vaguely reminiscent of Cat when she had flirted back at him as Ladybug. Well, in that case... That was when any comparison between her two main boys in her life was lost as Adrien went down on one knee before her. Her mind short-circuited, but somehow she could still make out the words he spoke. Marinette Dubang-Chang, will you do me the great honour of being my pretend girlfriend and my comrade in arms against Lila? Adrien looked up at Marinette hopefully. Her sky-blue eyes were wide and emotions flashed like lightning across their expanse. He knew he saw fear. That was understandable considering what she had been going through, but why would she be so sad and reluctant? Was the thought of dating him so horrible, even just for pretend? Anxiety felt like a ball of ice into his stomach. Oh, why did that thought hurt so much? But she had said that she had thought he was amazing, that he was a hero. To be a hero to her on both sides of the mask, without her even knowing it. Throw in a kiss from Ladybug that he could remember and he could die happy. Her lips that had strained smile of hers when she was nervous or stressed, but her eyes looked like she was hurting. Could she be thinking about Buttercup again? But if she was right, and everyone else was under Lila's influence, that probably included Buttercup too. Whoever he was, the blind fool. Forget that. He had been the fool for suggesting this in the first place. Marinette would never pretend to be his girlfriend when her love and affection lay elsewhere. He sighed and slowly withdrew his hand from hers. I'm sorry, Marinette. I didn't mean to make you feel uncomfortable. It was just the first reasonable idea I had for how to start this thing, and I guess it was a bad one. Let's forget about it. He stood to go back to his seat when her small hand snuck into his larger one once more. Yes, she whispered hesitantly. Yes to us forgetting it, or I'll be your pretend girlfriend, she stammered, her cheeks a bright pink. For some reason, a wave of relief crashed inside his chest at her halting words. His smile returned, and he felt like he was breathing again after a long time underwater. Thanks, Marinette. He gave her hand a gentle squeeze. I won't let you down, I promise. Her smile was sweet, but there were shadows in her eyes. I know you won't, she whispered, when she cleared her throat and said firmly, so if we're going to convince everyone we're dating, we have to create a backstory, 'cause Alia, for one, is going to demand details. especially since she seems to believe that you are secretly dating Lila. He couldn't help but shudder at the very idea. Oh, yes, let's talk about anything except that particular nightmare. She tried to hide a giggle behind her hand, and he grinned, having chased away those shadows for now. Her lips formed a small smirk that he had never seen on her face before, and she looked shyly up at him through her lashes. One nightmare Akuma was enough to deal with, don't you think? His heart gave a lurch before he burst out laughing at her joke. Her eyes widened in delight, and she giggled with him. You are the only one who really makes me laugh, Marinette, he said, chuckling his sides against the ache that had formed there. I'm glad. You laugh when you're nice. I mean, you're nice when you laugh. Oh. She slapped herself on the forehead at a stammering, finishing in a rush. You have a nice laugh. You're nice all the time. He felt himself blush a bit. Thanks, Marinette. You too. She blushed as well and looked down, tapping the paper with her pencil. So, how do we do this? I don't know. What kind of thing did you do with Luca? He asked, immediately curious. Was that too personal a question? Would she be offended if he asked? It's not like he had much experience with dating either. His whole relationship with Kagami was nothing but a string of stolen moments that never went anywhere. The only thing that had ever been close to what he thought of as a date would have been the surprise dinner he had planned for Ladybug, and she had been too busy. So he took Marinette to cheer her up after her own heartbreak. But that day at the ice rink, it was strange to see Marinette and Luca skating together. He had never seen her smile like that before. She had looked so free, as if she had shed all the things that burdened her and was floating to the stars without him. And when she had left, she was so sad, as if something had dragged her unwillingly back to earth. Blag had accused him of chasing after her that day, and deep down where he hid his most secret thoughts, he was afraid he had been, even if he wasn't sure why. Then he realized they had been staring at each other without speaking for a while, and he was responsible. You don't have to answer if you don't want to. She smiled wistfully and shrugged. We spent most of the time talking mainly. We went to a movie that got interrupted by a Kuma attack nearby. We went to Andre's for ice cream a few times. We listened to music, took walks together. That's pretty much it. Small dreams, nothing to grab anyone's attention. You? He shook his head and ran frustrated hands through his hair. Not even that. And there is nothing wrong with small dreams if they're yours. He was curious, but would asking it make things more awkward between them? Well, how did Luca ask you out? Maybe we could work off that. She shook her head, her gaze focused and intense. That won't work. Why not? You're not Luca, and Alia would recognize his confession if you used his. Adrien sighed. Right. Well, what about you ask me out then? That would solve the problem, wouldn't it? Marinette flushed darkly and shook her head. Alia wouldn't buy that. He just looked at her blankly. Why wouldn't she believe you asked me out? Does she not like me or something? She held up a finger, cleared her throat, and then said with a deep breath and exaggerated shyness, Adrien, would you go out with me? You're not that bad, he chuckled. Then he remembered that day at the movie theatre when she had told Kat that she never had any luck with guys because she was so afraid things wouldn't work out that she would never say what she wanted to say. That she tried to plan for every outcome and told herself stories to psych herself up, only to babble out those same stories when she tried to speak her heart. He had told Marinette that he was her opposite, that he couldn't help speaking about his love for Ladybug, but she? No. This was about him. This was about Marinette. He was going to be dating Marinette now, even if it was just a trick to get Lila's lies to start unraveling. She deserved his full attention. He wouldn't let his own insecurities get in the way of helping her, as Adrien or as Cat Noir. Wait, she told herself stories. Maybe that could work for her for a change. Okay, how about you make up a story for us, he suggested, as if we were characters in a book or a movie. What would you want to see on the screen? And then he remembered her corny confession. I mean, in a real-world context, of course. She tapped her lips with her pencil, eyes rolled to the ceiling, deep in thought. Then she focused on him once more. New York? She murmured, a slight smile forming on her lips. His eyes went wide. The hot dog? We danced in the sky. They already had a romantic moment, hadn't they? She blushed and looked down, scribbling on the piece of paper. Maybe Adrien, and he could hear the quotation marks around his name, could have been seeing Marinette as something more since then? In the movie, I mean, dreaming about her, until he had to see if it was all in his head. He smiled and nodded approvingly. That's pretty good. I'd buy a ticket to see that. So does Adrien ask Marinette out after school, or is it somewhere more private? Would he need to do anything special to sweep her off her feet? Marinette jotted down some more notes on her pad, but he noticed the tip of her ears had turned pink as well. Private would be better, otherwise someone else would have seen it, and I think he would only need to be himself, 'cause that is who he wants her to like, right? Yeah, you're right, he chuckled nervously. This is kind of weird, isn't it? It's like those folk who write stories about Ladybug and Cat Noir, huh? No wonder she doesn't like it. Who? She asked, her eyes jerking up to lock with his. He reached to scratch the back of his neck. Ladybug? I mean, at least that's what Cat Noir told me. She looked at him for a long moment, so long that he felt the heat prickle on the back of his neck. Had he given too much away? He had told her Cat and Adrien were friends, hadn't he? Finally she smiled. I'm glad you and Cat are friends. Her voice was so soft and gentle that he tried to swallow the lump that had formed in his throat. Why? He asked, hoping he didn't sound half strangled in his surprise. She gave a cute one-arm shrug. He's one of the sweetest people I know. I think he's lonely too. He couldn't help the soft smile that spread across his face. She really saw him, both of him. That left him feeling warm and comforted. Okay, so Adrien asks Marinette out after school at her house. Does that sound like something you would do? She asked, tentatively fiddling with her pencil. He nodded. Yeah, I may be a model, but I've never been one for doing big stuff out in the open. Too much backlash from fans and social media. He rolled his eyes. I once was caught on camera with a coffee stain on my shirt, and I spent a week keeping my head down. She giggled, her hand covering her mouth. Oh, after that perfume ad when you asked me to help you to see your mother's movie, I got lambasted for being out with you in my pajamas, and that towel? She shook her head. I guess that would mean their first date would have to be pretty low-key too, huh? Yeah, I suppose so. I don't have a lot of experience, but the stuff you did with Luca sounds nice. The slight twitch of her eyes told him that this was becoming awkward for her, so he tried to change direction a bit. What would be your perfect date, Marinette? He had to fight with himself not to draw it out into a perfect. It becomes second nature to drop into cat puns when he needed a boost of confidence. It was like drawing on his hero side. Why mine? she squeaked, pupils constricting into mere pinpricks with her nervousness. Adrien grinned at her. I may just be your pretend boyfriend, but you still deserve the best, Marinette. She blushed a dozen shades of pink at once, leaving him to wonder if she could actually blush into the ultraviolet spectrum. Be right back, she stammered and fled up the stairs to her room. He savoured another cookie until she came back, clutching a sketch pad to her chest. The roses still burning in her cheeks, she sat back down and held it out to him. Just don't tell anyone, okay? Of course not. He glanced down at the pages to which he had opened. His mind paused as his eyes took in the pictures before him. It was familiar. It was a night scene on a fenced-in rooftop. The full moon overhead, but the shadows were lit with candlelight and softened by rose petals picked out in crimson across the floor. On one side, leaned forlorn against the rail, staring out at the city, was him, as Cat Noir. It's not what it looks like, she babbled. Cat's dead gone on Ladybug, but he planned this romantic date for her last year and she didn't show. He came to visit me, and when he saw I was sad too, he shared it with me. It was so beautiful, and I guess I just wish someone would want to do something like that for me. That night meant something to her, Adrien thought. Is that when she fell in love with Cat? Oh, I should have thought that through better. He cleared his throat awkwardly. Well, if this was a movie, then that would be a perfect date, wouldn't it? We can go with that then. She blushed. You don't think Cat Noir would mind, do you? She asked with worried eyes, those shadows lurking once more. He shook his head. I know Cat pretty well. I think he would be flattered, but you can ask him next time you see him. He mentioned that he would be going to check on you more often. She bit her lower lip and nodded. Okay, good. And how long would Adrien and Marinette have been dating at this point? It felt weird, referring to himself in the third person like this. But if it was giving her the distance she needed to get through this first initial discussion, then he was willing to do it. Would a week be too short? She asked, her eyes distant once more. If it was more than 2 weeks, Alia and the other girls would have noticed. A week is fine with me. He downed the last of his milk, trying to swallow the awkwardness of this whole thing, but it was worth it to catch Lila in her own trap, and he would get to spend some more time with Marinette, something he'd been longing to do for a while. Sounds like we have a plan to start unwinding her lies while we look for more evidence. Is there anything else? She let out a ragged breath, her face as red as Nino's favourite cap. She rolled her eyes to the ceiling once more. She mumbled something he couldn't hear. He chuckled. Trust me, Marinette. I know this is awkward. I feel it too, but if there is something we need to plan for, we should discuss it, right? She gulped nervously and nodded quickly. Taking a deep breath, she blurted out, touching! He flushed as red as she did, his mouth hanging open in shock. But then again, this had been a day of strange surprises. Pupils constricting again in panic, she waved her hands frantically between them. No, that's not what I meant. I just, as dating, what are you, or maybe not, you're not, never mind, forget I said anything. He grabbed her hand to still them, and hopefully her panic. Marinette, it's not a problem. I'm a model, remember? He grinned and rolled his eyes, as if she could forget with my face plastered all over Paris. I'm used to stylists, makeup artists, and dresses touching me all the time. It's not like you're a crazed fan trying to still kiss with me without my permission. Why don't we just go with what you're comfortable with, okay? He gave her a lopsided grin and wiggled their joined hands. I take it hand-holding and hugs are alright with you. She nodded, a small smile on her face, even if her eyes were still shadowed. And since you have kissed me on the cheek before, is that okay too? She nodded again, biting her lower lip anxiously. Then we start with that, and handle anything else that comes up when it's needed. It's just... He couldn't help look sheepish. Please keep in mind that my life has got a lot of strings attached. That perfume ad was just a small taste of what will happen once people find out about, well, us. He let go of one hand to gesture back and forth between them. Are you up for that? Marinette sighed, and he could feel her hands trembling in his. If this is the only way we can get Lila to leave you alone, then yeah. He frowned and ran his thumb over the bandages he had placed over her knuckles. Yet another instant of her fighting for him. No, this is about helping you, Marinette. She's using me to hurt you, and I'm not gonna let you face her alone anymore. I promise. Thank you for listening to part 2. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you send Jheqia some love for writing it. Make sure you send me some love by smashing that like button. Comment down below what you think of it and what will happen in part 2, which will come out next week. And make sure you subscribe so you do not miss out on these treats, future treats, other series and one-shots. And I hope you are good, and I will speak to you soon. Bye.